Good morning, viewers. Graham Healy, Rise Up Australia Party for Queensland Senate candidate, along with Lionel Henaway, our Indigenous Senate candidate for Queensland. Well, here we are at the final countdown, the final week. People be thinking about, how they want the government of Australia, based on previous performances. Question mark, should I say the pathetic performance of previous governments, leading Australia down the line of globalisation, tying themselves in with international trade agreements with communist China, which is undermining our employment, undermining our workplace benefits, etc., 457 visas and all that. It's just absolutely ridiculous. And as we expose ourselves in Australia, we're almost our net worth, each individual's net worth, 70% exposed to real estate. Now, I went along to the economist Harry Dent's seminar the other day, and quote, he's a master on statistics and what have you globally as far as financial things are concerned, financial and political. And Australia now has the second highest housing bubble in the world beside Canada. So, to purchase a house in Brisbane, Sydney or Melbourne, you're looking upwards of 1.2 million. That's unaffordable for new home buyers, obviously. So everyone's renting. And in the meantime, China, communist China, because remember, China murdered 70 million of its own people, and you've got to be very careful. Sure, you can trade with any other nations, but you've got to trade from a sovereign nation point of view. And I notice that President Trump is now increasing the tariffs to China so that he's making the American products more saleable within America and making the foreign overseas products more expensive. And that's what you've got to do. And reason, it isn't a level playing field. Let's look at it. All the communist countries, and especially China I'm focusing on this particular broadcast, they're working on slave labour. If you don't do what you're told, suddenly you'll go to a re-education camp. So what you've got to bear in mind is China in the background is trying to destroy Christianity. It's wiping out churches, knocking them down, putting people into the communist re-education camps. You've got to be very careful. See, socialism is really communism in patience. It's a patient communist is a socialist. So when you have a look at the Labor Party and you have a look at the Greens, they on one level they're all talking about democracy, but that's the last thing they want. They don't want democracy. They want you repeating their narrative down to the last letter. They don't believe in critical thinking. They don't believe in freedom of speech. They don't believe in freedom of religion. Now, I had to listen to Mark Latham's speech in the New South Wales Senate or government the other day. Quite good, until he, I agree with Mark on every one of his points, except when he got to the Islam one, and I'll go through that in a second. Now, go onto our website. I've got a few websites, so we're talking about the political one now. So go onto our website, riseupaustraliabrisbane.com. And that's the one that I've done up to interface with the main Rise Up Australia website in Melbourne. Go onto that, and we've got the instructions on how to vote in the Senate. We've got our how to vote card. So I'll just repeat that again, riseupaustraliabrisbane.com. The front page has got our how to vote card for the Senate and how to number them. We're number 1 in the Senate here in New South Wales, and we've got a particular way that we suggest to you to number the 1 to 10 above the line, all right, above the line. So, and then we've got a very good advertisement regarding what Rise Up Australia Party is all about, and I've got that beside that on the front page. And if anyone wants to donate any money, we have a donation page. And look, I sort of had a bit of a laugh when I see the Liberal Party, a photograph of Scott Morrison, God bless him, but they're coming out and say, if you want to chip in and help them. I mean, for goodness sake, those guys have got unlimited television coverage. They've got unlimited Facebook media and everything, and then they want you to chip in. Ladies and gentlemen, the minor parties, Rise Up Australia, we're doing all this from our own expenses. We get nothing from taxpayer-funded anything. And it's just our supporters, like people who just chip in $50, $100, $200. That's how we get there. But all these other major parties are getting taxpayer-funded advertising on billboards everywhere. And good old Clive Palmer, I mean, I've got no problem with Clive. But, you know, he's got $50 million of advertising. So every social media, on the road signs, you're seeing old Clive Palmer, you know, make Australia great again. It just annoys me a little bit that the minor parties don't get any funding, well, I suppose until we get in, and it's just not fair. But, you know, we're Anzacs, we're Aussie battlers, so just, if you like, go onto our page and chuck in a donation for us, because this is the last week, and we've got to do a bit of, you know, Facebook advertising and all that sort of stuff. And it would really help us, as versed all the rest who've got budgets allocated from taxpayer-funded money. We haven't. We fund ourselves. So just remember that. Now, the how to vote form, I don't know whether that's coming up back to front. Probably is. It looks like back to front to me. But that will be on our website, riseupaustraliabrisbane.com. So please go onto that. That's up there's our leader, Daniel Nyala, who is originally from Sri Lanka. You might know a thing or two about Middle Eastern affairs, where he spent 2 years in Saudi Arabia. He's seen 3 beheadings and 2 beheadings attempted on him. So he might just know a bit about the fundamental Islam. Just might know a little bit. And there's our other Senate, the Indigenous First Nations person, Lionel Henaway. Lionel Henaway is a very good man, and he will be a voice for Aboriginal people in Australia, especially when we get in the Senate. And of course, that's yours truly, Graham Healy, there. So we'll be handing these out at Indooroopilly, and I think Lionel's over at, he could be at Inala, and also at, where are we? On the south-east side, somewhere near Capalaba, back from there. Okay, so Mount Cravat, that area there. Okay, all right. Now, our 3 main platforms, you know, we've sort of gone on about, I've gone on, I suppose, about fundamental Islam a lot, and it's an important one, and I'll go into that in a second. But the 3 main ones are one will cancel 125 taxes in this country. See, what's happened with Liberals and Labor, quick overview. Labor, you would never give your wallet to anyone who's from Labor. They'd spend everything and plus your credit cards. They've done that continuously right from the Gough Whitlam days. And in my opinion, I suppose the only, well, I voted for Bob Hawke, would you believe? And I was a shop steward union guy at the time. And I like Bob, right? That's it. And the rest, when I went into small business, as it says on my profile there, I suddenly realised that, hang on, you know, we've got to have a broader outlook than that. But the Liberals have been disappointing as well. Johnny Howard, even though the Liberals rave on about Johnny Howard, I like Johnny, you know, little Johnny Howard. But what he did was he produced the first home buyer's loan back in the 70s and 80s. And that was okay for a little while. But what it did, it transferred the government debt into personal debt. So, you know, I won't go on about the financial factors of things, but go onto our website and have a look at my page on the economy of Australia and the cash flow forecasts and all this sort of thing, and have a look at the videos that I've got with interviews with Harry Dent. You'll understand why Australia is actually in not a really good economic position, despite what Prime Minister Scott Morrison has said, you know, the men in black, remember those fellas? It's all in black, we're all in black. Hang on, we're relying on a iron ore bubble. Like last time, there was an iron ore bubble and bonk, what goes up must come down. So, unfortunately, the current governments, and the Liberal governments, have really done nothing substantially to reduce personal debt in the overall picture. Because go on to debtclock.com for Australia, and you'll see that we're actually 7 trillion in debt when you add up all the indebtedness from personal debt to government debt. You see, they only talk about government debt, and that's not the big picture. That's just one little piece of it. The real big picture is the personal debt. Now, I'll just tell you this one, and just get this fact buried into the mind. The net worth of every Australian is vulnerable. 70% of the net worth is in real estate, homes, real estate and all that. Now, think about this. We are in the biggest real estate bubble of all time, us and Canada. And think about this. This is all from Harry Dent, and it's quite appropriate. China was laundering its cash in the Australian real estate market. Now that's all ground to a halt, right? And China has been madly trying to buy up properties. At last time I looked at it, they own 25% of all foreign-owned properties in this country, plus the Liberals, 99-year leases on the Port of Darwin, down in Melbourne and all this. That's not a good move. We do not give any of our assets out to communist countries. It's fatal. You know, our Anzacs fought for freedom from communism, freedom from Nazism and all the rest of it. And our politicians, and on this occasion, especially for the Darwin, leasing out of the port, was your good old Liberals. And you're actually giving power and control over our essential assets. Not to mention the cotton farming that has taken the water out of the Murray-Darling basin. So there's a whole lot of negative stuff that should not have been allowed to happen. So, okay, we can go on about that, but hey, this is a countdown to the election broadcast, really. And I just have a bit of a laugh. I saw a video with old Billy Shorten reaching out his hand to a worker, and the worker just walked away. Wasn't that a good one? Okay, the 3 main issues for us. Cancel 125 taxes. We will cancel every tax that is currently charged to every Australian. You think that's a little bit radical? The fact is, the government, when you have a look at it, it's all on the website, we've gone through this. The government gets about almost 450 billion from current taxation revenue. And despite the talk about GST all the time, the most of the revenue comes out of your wages and salaries and small businesses, provisional tax, double tax. You know, we get double tax. The small business people, you get double tax. That's the big help from the Australian government. And then what's his name, Shorten, now he's looking at death tax. Now he's looking at the big end of town. Oh, he's only worth 61 million himself. Oh, yeah, he would know all about the big end of town, Shorten would. Don't think he's ever done a hard day's work in his life. You know, I don't think he's ever, you just have a look at him. Would he ever do 1 day's work on a property or something? I mean, I work on a 25-acre property, you know, chainsawing up and down hills, bust my guts out there like any other Australian. You could put Shorten out in one of those properties. I mean, send him out west for a little while and see how he goes. Oh, geez, you know. Apart from the policies, I look at someone and see what sort of background they've had in the real world. And while I'm on Shorten, he's never run a business. He's never run a business. How could someone like that run a country? think about that very carefully. Same with all the politicians. If you've never run a business, I don't care whether it's a small business. I've run probably 10 small businesses. If you've never run one, you've got no idea. Don't talk to me about you can run the country when you can't even run a lemonade stall, right? Okay, the Bradford irrigation scheme. Now, we've been on about that since day one. And I agree with Bob Catter. I know Bob Catter, and I knew Bob Catter's father, but so I agree with Bob Catter on this issue. And a few of the other minor parties have jumped on the Bradford scheme. Good. I'll work in with that. But we've got to do it. So if we get into the Senate, Rise Up Australia gets into the Senate, and we get in with other minor parties and form a security bloc in the Senate, I'll guarantee you this, all you Australians out there, we, and especially me, I will not stop until we have the Bradford scheme totally built in the next 5 years. That's the key for prosperity of this country. Once we've got that in place, I mean, by my estimations, I think it's 100 dams or whatever, and we've checked with the Indigenous people through Lionel Henaway and our Northern Territory Senator Leslie Harris. Aboriginal people love water, right? See, and I'm not speaking for Aboriginal people, I'll let Aboriginal people, our senators, speak for themselves, but there's no argument about if we regenerate the Murray-Darling Basin from North Queensland and run those big pipes into the river, and then have every farm in Australia producing all the products and exporting rather than being a net importer. Could you imagine it? But the Indigenous people, who are really they're like the guardians of the land. They were here first, remember? They got no problem with water. They love water, and it grows the land. See, the Aboriginal person, and I'm not speaking for Aboriginals, but from my perspective, let Lionel Henaway do all the talking, Les Harris, but they're attached to the land. They see the land as very, very, it's like, you know, if you haven't got the land happy, the country happy, no one's happy. You know, you can't, they're tied to the land. All their Dreamtime stories is about, you know, different parts in the land and that. So what I know is once we start doing the Bradfield scheme, a lot of benefit will go to the Aboriginal people, and they will be able to run their own businesses off that, cattle industries, little like farms and stuff like that. Plus, you see what Morrison's doing at the moment. The Liberals' plan is, okay, we've got whatever it is, 600,000 immigrants from third world countries coming into this country, straight onto the unemployment system, and then they all deny that. But just recently, $250 million was scammed out of the childcare / welfare by, it looked like people of the faith of Islam, from the news reports that I'm looking at. So, you know, you've got a culture that we're bringing in, and I'll get into this in a second. I'll just touch on this. You've got a culture that thinks that when they come into this country, they're on welfare, and then they rort the system, because you've got, whether you admit it or not, you've got in what I call fundamental Islam, they're more than one wife, all this sort of stuff, you know, 20 kids a family and all that, and then straight onto our social security system. So there's a few issues there. I'm all for big families and all this sort of stuff, but, you know, where some of us are supporting the bad habits of others, that's not right. Anyway, we'll go into that in a second. So, just repeating again, cancel 125 taxes. Now, how are we going to do that? We'll have a 2% transaction tax. The reality is, have a look at the figures on my website. The 2% transaction tax on every transaction, including the big boys at the end of town, including Bill Shorten, worth 61 million apparently. Maybe he's one of the big boys. Did you ever think about that? So, 2% transaction tax will get you about $1.25 trillion in revenue. So if everyone pays tax, the small end of town, us, the workers and the medium to small businesses, the tax burden will be taken off us. And it'll be just distributed equally. And you can remember the big companies are pushing through a lot of money, billions of dollars. As an example, Origin Energy in Melbourne made $11.2 billion, thousand million, 1 billion's 1,000 million, $11.2 billion profit, paid zero tax. Same goes for the lot of them. Now, people say to me, well, isn't it, it's international law that they don't pay tax. I said, really? In the Senate, we'll pass bills to change that overnight. And any purchases or any sales of any product, including iPhones, any product, Uber, all these, Google, all that, they will pay tax from transaction tax in this country. You do that, suddenly you reverse a cash flow back into the country instead of out of the country. Have a think about that. Bradford Irrigation Scheme, I had a vision about this 5 or more years ago, 6 years ago now. And what I saw was the central part of Australia was almost like, well, in fact, was like the Garden of Eden. So we were supplying primary produce, wheat, sugarcane, everything, to Southeast Asia. And I mean, on a scale never seen before. So at the moment, we're a net importer. We're importing food products into this country. What, mangoes and stuff? Are you joking? Is that's part of the international trade agreements, is it? That we reduce Australia down to the lowest common denominator and make it. See, without going into it, the big picture behind all this is globalisation. Those who understand it will know what I'm talking about. But globalisation, through an unelected government being the UN, what they try and do, and you see all this flooding, third world immigration to all the different countries like France, Germany, even the UK is a big mess, and Donald Trump's trying to stop it coming up from Mexico into California and those areas there. What happens when they flood the countries with all these what are called third world immigrants who, there's some that are productive, but there's a hell of a lot who aren't and just go into the welfare system. What they're doing is the globalisation picture. You've got to look at it the big picture. They're trying to reduce down to the lowest common denominator. It's communism. The UN's a communist ideology, and the dangerous thing with the UN is it's 70% controlled by the Arabs, i.e. fundamental Islam. So you just think about that. That culture that beheads people, female genital mutilation, they chop off arms, legs. I mean, our leader's seen 3 beheadings. They pull you up. You're in Saudi Arabia there, and some poor character is, stolen maybe a loaf of bread or something, and then they pull up. Everyone's got to pull up in the middle of the road, and they behead the guy in front of everyone. Do you want that ideology in Australia, do you? Or do you want to keep 600,000, I think that was the last figure we looked at, immigrants coming into this country from those sort of countries that have spent all their lives under that ideology since 600 AD, nothing's changed. The fact is, if they didn't have oil in the Middle East, they'd be back there 600 AD. There's been nothing productive, creative coming out, or has ever come out of those countries in bar Israel in the Middle East. They've made no. You think about it. What scientific advancements have they made? Yeah, I'm still waiting. Think about it. What great philosophical books have they written? What medical breakthroughs have they done? Apart from Israel, none. Zero. Zip. Oh, they got oil. And they were set up that way because of the US. Now, you got to think about it. Western culture is the one that's advanced civilization. And you got to think about this. Western culture, Western democracy, what's the base for that? You think about it. It's Judeo-Christian base. So not everyone these days calls themselves a Christian, but the Judeo-Christian base has in fact established our law system, It's established democracy. Democracy really is free will. You're right, freedom of speech, your free will, freedom of religion, provided that religion doesn't harm others. See, in Australia, I'll just go on this subject, we've got freedom of religion. Daniel Nyala actually was an important part of that, because he had a 5-year court battle, and you can read about that on the website. But at the end of the day, he achieved a freedom of religion for every church and Christian organisation in this country, and it went global. So, you know, he's a man of the moment, that's for certain. But the democracy that we enjoy in Western cultures, well, you know, up until we had this big spread of what I call the socialism/communism, like the Labor and Greens, a democratic country should be able to critically analyse anything, including any ideology, including fundamental Islam and Buddhism, anything like that. So the thing with freedom of religion, that's okay as long as that religion doesn't harm others. Now, you can try and be an apologist for fundamental Islam, and one of our platforms is that what we're saying is we will ban Sharia law in this country. And for that matter, we will go along with what Supreme Court Judge Des Farhan has said in Sydney Court while sentencing terrorists to jail in Australia, that he suggests, and this is all referenced on the website, he suggests that the Muslim community, and we're talking about ideology, we're not talking about individuals, the Muslim community should renounce the belligerent verses and violent verses of the Quran. Unfortunately, there's 150 of them, of jihad, and in summary, they are the 150 verses summarised in the overview, say death to infidels, Jews and Christians. Well, that covers 99% of Australia and any other country. You've got an inherent problem here, and the person I like to refer to with this, who knows what he's talking about, is Imam Tawhidi. Go on the website, I've got links to Imam Tawhidi, which is the Imam of Peace, and what he believes in is exactly what Rise Up Australia believes in, that all people that come to this country, we're a multi-ethnic society, not multicultural. We don't want a whole lot of cults in this country. One of them being a death cult. Well, the one that wants to kill people, you know, death to infidels, Jews and Christians. That's written into the texts that's preached in mosques. Now, this is critically analysing stuff. I'm not talking about people personally. We have a right to analyse the ideology, the political side of fundamental Islam. Regarding the political side of fundamental Islam, have a look at, I've got Professor Bill Warner, who has got the website politicalislam.com. He's extremely coherent in all matters in political Islam. Very good. You've got to educate yourself, really. So, bottom line is, I agree with Imam Tawhidi, who's in South Australia. Basically is this, that any of our current Muslim population, and we all love everyone, as Christians we love everyone, provided that relationship doesn't involve in some people killing other people for the religious so-called beliefs. And on that subject, when I talk about religious beliefs, I'll just mention that as a Christian, you've got to remember the 10 Commandments, and you know, one of the main one is, thou shalt not murder. So when people say they're murdering people and then quoting the religious verses, it goes against the actual 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not murder, which is premeditated killing. So, you can't tell me or anyone that murdering innocent people, as in terrorism, has anything to do with a God that's supposed to love people. So the freedom of religion thing, it could be Buddhism, it could be Hinduism, whatever. When it comes to the point that they're prepared to do harm to others, not love others, as the New Testament says in the Christianity, You know, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, and love your neighbour as you would yourself. You know, that's the golden rule. Not wipe everyone out that doesn't agree with you. Now, on that subject, not wipe everyone out that doesn't agree with you. Have a look at, I'll switch this over to the Greens and the Labor. See, when you look at communist ideology, which they are, they're communist ideology, they sound all, you know, fuzzy and warm and all this sort of stuff, but when you actually look into them, anyone who has a separate opinion, they want to vilify, they want to put tags on like Islamophobia, racist, bigot, all these other brainless tags without any qualified debate. So that you're very dangerous, that situation, and these days you have you know, all these young people that wouldn't know what time of day it is, you know, egging the Prime Minister, egging, you know, Senator Fraser Anning, and everyone, and especially the Greens, thinks that, oh, they're a hero, smashing eggs on people's faces. I'm a self-defence guy, and I've trained military and all that, and it sounds good, doesn't it? But one day, that won't be an egg, that might be a gun, it might be, you know, I hate to say this, but it could be something filled with acid. It won't be so funny then, will it? It's like that situation with Prime Minister Morrison. Some old lady, elderly lady, sorry, got knocked down in the process. She got a hip broken. And that stupid girl, you know, that couldn't even throw an egg properly, I mean, is determining what should happen and should not happen with the Prime Minister. This stupidity, we've got to completely get away from it altogether. Okay, so I won't go on about that. Just this was supposed to be a short broadcast, but anyway. So the three main issues that we're talking about is cancel 125 taxes, increase the cash flow, re-sovereignise Australia, the Bradford Irrigation Scheme. I will personally, and myself and Indigenous Senator Lionel Henaway, will work with any party that wants to build a Bradford scheme. That's our objective. I know Bob Catt has been on about that for 30 years. Hey, Bob, let's get it done. Get into the Senate and let's form a bloc and do something positive in this country, not short-term, you know. We want long-term strategies to make Australia great and prosperous, actually. Turn it from a net importer to a net exporter. We can turn it around. Ban Sharia law, and in that thing, remember, when I talk about Sharia law, we are focused not on the individual, because as Christians, we love everyone. We love the existing Muslims that are here in this country. You know, they're here because they want to get away from the terror and the totalitarian regimes in the Middle East. Well, I assume they do. I've got a few issues with that from a political point of view. Is halal taxes. Should be no such thing in Australia. Sharia finance, interest-free finance to, you know, the Muslim community. All these sort of things, and we've got to really reassess that side of things. The bottom line is exactly what Imam Tawhidi says, is that the Muslim people that come to this country, and we love them all as Christians, provided what they're doing isn't plotting away and planning to, you know, kill people down Burke Street and all this sort of stuff. And some people say, okay, that's isolated incidences. I say, better have a look at Sri Lanka. That's what I say. And you better go on to our website with the links to thereligionofpeace.com and see that last year 11,000 plus people were murdered by fundamental Islam, and this year 2019 600 a month get butchered by fundamental Islam. Now, what motivates these terrorists is what you've got to look at, and it's just exactly what Judge Des Farran said, the Supreme Court judge in Sydney, Australia, is that these terrorists, when they go to court, they quote the Quran. So the root cause of their fundamentalism, I don't say they're radicalised, they're fundamentalised. because they're literally applying what they're instructed to do in the Quran. You've got to realise that in that ideology, they believe that the Quran is from God. God's telling them to do this, see? So you've got to think about this very carefully. So as open-minded Christians and open-minded in a Western society, we have a right to analyse any ideology that's going to be potentially harmful to the society of this country. And, you know, I'm all for the Muslim people who adopt the constitution of this country and step away from all the totalitarianism that's happening, like in Saudi Arabia, all these places, and accept our culture, the Australian culture, under the constitution. We accept that. They accept that. You know, they're part of our society, just like any other people groups, any other ethnic groups that come to this country and have come to this country. But you've got to, you really have to reassess. Now, I like using what's happened in Sri Lanka. It's the test case. You look what's happening. You have a look at 9/11. There are 19 terrorists, Al-Qaeda, who butchered 3,000 people, and 6,000 others were fairly seriously injured. Then you look at 9 terrorists in Sri Lanka, this 2019 Easter, almost 300 butchered by these terrorists with you know, backpacks with bombs and all this. And unlike Obama and Hillary Clinton, who didn't even mention that they were at Easter services or that they were Christians, because the focus is to kill Christians, you know, remember, death to infidels, Jews and Christians. Now the Sri Lankan government, who sort of acted a little bit, they could have acted a lot earlier, now they're scanning right through the country and they're deporting criminals, terrorists, and of course they're fundamental Islam terrorists. They're not, you know, there's no Buddhist terrorists there that I know of, and there's certainly no Christian terrorists. And so they're deporting them and they're scanning the whole country. They're finding guns and weapons and bombs buried in yards, in mosques and all this sort of stuff. So what you've got to understand is mosques, not just a place of worship, it's actually a military barracks in Islam. You know, so all I'm about, and I won't go on about this any further, but you've got to educate yourself. We've got all the links to educate yourself regarding fundamental Islam. And that is a main issue in this election. Now, what our solution is, one will ban Sharia law legally, so you can't, if anyone's caught doing that, they're deported. We believe we should stop all Islamic immigration now. And then who we have here is that we go through the 400 odd potential terrorists on federal police watch at the moment. Really, they've got to be deported. So we've got to scan through and get all, and I believe that we should put Imam Healy in charge of, you know, Muslim affairs, you know, the Muslim community. He's got the right attitude, and we scan through it and we make certain that we don't have any connections with Al-Qaeda or any of the terrorists. And that. As a matter of fact, we've had terrorist organisations demonstrating in Melbourne. That's not on. We've got to purge all that out of Australia and any other, you know, minorities that are potentially going to damage Australia. So, you know, that's not victimising Muslim people in particular, but hey, you know, at the end of the day, that's written in the Quran. The other thing is that what I would seriously look at is the any Islamic community that is already in Parliament, and there's a few of them, had they sworn their oath of office on the Quran with 150 verses of jihad embedded in the writings of that. This must be addressed. So in a free will society or democratic society, we have a right to critically analyse everything, including people can analyse Christianity, you know, New Testament, you know, the command to love everyone. You can analyse that till the cows come home. It's not going to kill anyone. Only person got killed in in the New Testament. Jesus put himself up on the cross, and at the end of the day took all the sins of people so that we can be redeemed. That's basically it, and that's a free will choice. The only reason I'm a Christian is that I've made a free will choice to be a Christian. No one forced me, fear of death, to be a Christian or something. And in saying that, with fundamental Islam, 77%, we've just gone onto another file, 77% of Islam right across the world agree totally, including Malaysia and all the other countries that you think are moderate, 77% of them agree that if someone leaves the Muslim faith, it's a death sentence, including London. And we've had people come over from London and give us testimonies about that they've had their cars firebombed, all sorts of stuff, because they've converted to Christianity. Free will? No such thing. All right, I've gone off a little bit track there. This election, there's some serious stuff going on. You know, we've got all the political stuff, and we've got some religious stuff in the background, you know, ideologies and all this. So just remember, number one, we will cancel 125 taxes in this country, put in a 2% transaction tax, re-sovereigntise Australia. Number two, the Bradford irrigation scheme. That will change the dynamics of Australia. It'll make us great again, prosperous. Number three, we've got to address Islamic terrorism, fundamental Islam terrorism. And that's not focusing on the existing Muslim community that are doing the right thing, but there are a few issues there that, you know, we at Rise Up Australia are very concerned about. One being halal taxes. Why are we paying tax to a religious ideology? Interest-free from they've got a Sharia banking system already here, the construction of mosques and all this, which double up as military barracks in the Middle East. And then there's another issue that I'm not real happy about, is there's a mass security guards with weapons. There's a lot of Islamic security guards, a great deal of Islamic security guards all got weapons. I've done these courses. I'm not certain of the numbers now, but there's quite a large percentage. So there's sort of like a little army building up in the background. That would you feel safe that they've actually got weapons, even though they are legally licensed? Question mark. So there's a few issues. So with this election, you know, I believe this election is the make it or break it election to make Australia great again and make it safe. There's a big security thing going on here. I want to make it safe. We want to make it safe for all the ethnic races in this country, including the Muslim community. And my answer to that is, I get into the Senate, I'll work with the other parties, and what I'm proposing is I will put Imam Tawhidi in charge of Islamic affairs, so that, you know, he's the Imam of peace. So we don't want all those other characters that, you know, when some terrorism act happens, they all remain silent. You know, when Scott Morrison said, oh, well, there's, you know, in the Burke Street terrorist act recently, last year, Scott Morrison said, oh, you know, Islamic terrorism, and of course we need the cooperation from the Muslim community. Silence. Nothing. Step back into the shadows. We're not taking responsibility for that fellow, even though he's in the mosque in Melbourne. Oh, okay. Those issues have got to be addressed. Every Australian knows that. And it's not, again, I'll repeat, we're not talking about the people. We're talking about the ideology that commits crimes, i.e. mass murders. And you want the most current example is Sri Lanka. And one of the terrorists was radicalised or fundamentalised in Melbourne, Australia. Think about that very carefully when you go to the voting booths this next Saturday, the 18th. It's not just about what's in it for you. You know, someone like Morrison giving them people $125 for their electricity bill or something ridiculous like that. We've got to do some major infrastructure changes. We've got to cancel the taxes, 125 of them, and we've got to address the fundamental Islam issue, which will lead to terrorism. And we do not want halal taxes and all this sort of stuff. This is Australia. This is not the Middle East. We don't want people coming over here and resetting up the totalitarian regimes that didn't work in the Middle East that they're trying to escape from. If you want to escape from the Middle East, and you're quite welcome to, we've got, whatever area of the Middle East you come from, you can come to Australia, but you're under Australian law and you're under the Australian Constitution. And where that clashes, unfortunately, and this is where I disagree with Mark Latham, is when you understand and educate yourself about fundamental Islam, the fact is that the Quran is their constitution. So you think about that. Now, there's a lot to learn in that area because it can be very deceptive and divisive, but my solution is that we put the main liaison officer with the Muslim community in Australia should be Imam Tawhidi, the Imam of Peace. He's got it all together, and he's got what I call the democratic point of view. A good bloke, and he's the sort of Muslim Australian that we want here is someone that puts Australia first. Same with any ethnic race, but so I've said enough on that. So when you go to the voting booths this Saturday, we're number one on the Senate ticket, Rise Up Australia. So by voting for us, you're also voting for an Indigenous Senator, Lionel Henaway, a top bloke. He's a Christian minister, plus he's a very spiritual man. And it's like a lot of Aboriginal people who are Christians. The Aboriginal people think about spirit first, irrespective of whether they're Christians or not. They think spirit first. The average Caucasian thinks logic, whereas the Indigenous people think spiritual stuff. And so I really like that partnership with myself and Lionel. It's sort of I'm the upfront man in many respects, and then Lionel's like a steady force with us who represents every Indigenous person in this country, plus everyone really, because we're a multi-ethnic country. And we've got to respect our First Nations people. You've seen that movie, Guardians of the Universe? Well, the Aboriginal people are guardians of Australia. And there's a lot of stuff that we're going to present with Lionel, which a lot of people like. And, together, arm in arm with Indigenous people, arm in arm with all the ethnic races, our leaders from Sri Lanka, and Muslim people that are all for Australia and the Constitution, want to leave all the totalitarian Sharia law and all that stuff back in the Middle East. They want a new life in Australia because they've had enough of that other stuff, right? Arm in arm with all those people, that is the Australia I see. Plus, how we'll solve a lot of the, you've got the African crime and all this sort of stuff. Well, that's real. The media's not reporting it, but it's very real. I've been to shops here in Brisbane that have been attacked by, young Africans with knives in the Optus shop, quite a few of them, and threatened and stabbed and all this, and so that never makes the media. But one of the reasons those young fellows are out robbing places is they haven't got a job. So when we start the Bradfield scheme, we can turn the economy of Australia around. Everyone will have a job. When I left school, I worked up at Yaboola as a plumber's labourer. I just left school, drove my motorbike up to Yaboola, got a job. That's what it was like in Australia. We want to return it back to that, where everyone that's here can get a job. And you know what? When people have got employment without tax, you've got a prosperous community. The crime rate drops down to just about zero, and everyone's happy then because they can provide for their families, and house prices at the right price and all that sort of stuff. So, okay, I've had enough to say. That's my 49 minutes. I'm thinking that's quite a large broadcast, but and those subjects that I spoke about, a lot of people don't want to speak about that, but we will at Rise Up Australia. But remember, as Christians, we love everyone. That's the commandment. As a Christian, the Lord himself says, love You know, love your neighbour as you would yourself, and do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So that's the prime motivating force behind us. However, we are a democratic country, so we have the right to analyse, critically analyse, any ideology, any business deal, any globalisation, and all that. Now, I'll just touch on, just before I sign off, I'll just touch on not globalisation, but climate change. You know, just quickly on that. Climate change, goodness sake. The actual scientists who know what they're talking about and who are independent of the UN funding, right? The fact is 150 years, 0.8 of a degree Kelvin change in temperature. It's a scam. Al Gore and all that, it's a scam. Sure, we need renewables and we can work on that scientifically, but the people who got the biggest voices and all yelling and screaming about climate change are those people who aren't scientifically qualified, unfortunately. Go onto our website. I've got PragerU videos about climate change where we've actually got, like for instance, the co-founder of Greenpeace. Also, we've got professors in meteorology. We've got Nobel Prize winning professors who give you the real facts. See, I'm doing a medical science degree at the moment, among all my other stuff that I'm doing. I'm in chiropractic, and what you require when you're doing the sciences, you require facts, you require references, and you base those references on other scientists who actually know what they're talking about, right? So educate yourself. Don't listen to the media, unqualified politicians, or what I call greenie type activists who haven't got facts and figures or empirical evidence to back themselves up. It's all emotional hype, and it's all what I call tags. You know, oh, you're a climate skeptic. What's that supposed to mean? I want to see the facts. My mind thinks very analytically. So if you can't produce the facts, you're just talking, as I say, in Queensland, you're just talking BS. So, folks, when you go to the polls, think very carefully who you're voting for. My suggestion is, of course, number one for Rise Up Australia in Queensland, New South Wales, and in Melbourne, in Victoria. But think about this. Do you want the same mob in government? Yes. Wherefore Scott Morrison, I mean, there's a few shortcomings. I'd like to see him as a stronger leader, but the last thing on this planet would ever possibly imagine it would be like Armageddon in Australia is you ever put the Labor, Bill Shorten and his crew, or the Greens anywhere near power. Haven't you seen them over this period of time and seen that they just can't string any facts together properly? They can't run a budget. And you got that, I call Di Natale, Dr. Death, you know, Mr. Abortion. Same with the Labor Party. They're promoting abortion, murdering of children. You think about that. I'm doing medical science. And, you know, old Dr. Death, Di Natale. Why do I call him Dr. Death? Because he's undergone what I call not a Hippocratic oath, a hypocritical oath, where his so-called education or being a medical doctor is supposed to preserve life, not take it away from children. Can you believe we've got to this point in Australia? Honestly. I mean, you know, I'm 64 this year. I can't believe that a very small percentage of minority, you know, the LBGD, RST, MUG, the homosexuals, gays, who cares what they're doing? But why are they controlling the policy in this country? You know, 98% of Australians, all Australians, just want a less tax, a job, and a happy family. I mean, is that too much to ask? All these, what I call perverted sexual agendas, including safe schools and all this rubbish. Where did all this come from, and how come a minority is manipulating the majority? And I'll close on this. Have a look what's happened with Israel Folau. I stand with him as a Christian for certain. Well, the question I've got to ask is, where's all the other churches standing with him? Eh? Now, Israel Folau, that is a clear case of religious vilification by a homosexual CEO of Qantas. Supposed to be an Australian company manipulating sponsorship money, well, I call it commercial terrorism, to sack a man who's quoting the Bible. I'll tell you what, my prediction is Rugby Australia is going to go broke, and good old Alan Joyce, just buy him a ticket to Brunei, see how he gets on there. See, the ironical thing of that guy, I mean, I'm not anti-homophobic or anything like that, I'm not. But you know what this guy's motivation behind victimising Israel Folau. You know that. And but he associates with all the Middle Eastern airlines where if he winds up in that country, they'll stone him to death. It's just so hypocritical. As a Christian, I'll tell you now, I don't really care personally what slant someone's coming from. A Christian's, from my perspective, I'm straight. I don't care if anyone's gay or whatever they are. But as long as they don't try and vilify me or put that sort of mentality on me, I couldn't care less. That's their choice in life. If that's where they want to live their life, great. But you'll notice that Alan Joyce is manipulating through money and funding. He's manipulating the employment of Israel Folau in millions of dollars, and he's doing him over that way. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, is not a democratic country. You see, all these sort of people who are on what I call the fringe, when they get into positions of power, they manipulate, and they want you to bow down to their narrative. Sorry, it's a free country. I've got the right to democratically analyse anyone and their sexual position. I don't condemn them. That's their choice. But it's not their choice to manipulate me into what they're thinking. Or I won't get a job because I'm not pro-homosexual or something. Who cares? You know what I mean? It's just, yeah. Okay. All right. That's it. Have a good day. God bless everyone. And remember, Jesus is Lord at the end of the day. I just felt like saying that. You go to the polls and vote for us. You're voting for a patriotic Christian party who believes in freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and true democracy. And we love all people, including the Muslims in this country, that accept the the Constitution. Okay, Graham Healy over and out, and we'll make Australia great for all Australians. Okay, have a good day. Bye now.